Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Blanche Spataro, and I'm the Communications and Engagement Lead for the School Attendance Data team. This is our first webinar of 2025, and I just want to start by thanking everyone on the call for all your hard work across the autumn term to help improve attendance. Can we move to the next slide now, please? Before we begin the presentation, I'm just going to start by running through these points. So firstly, the webinar is being recorded and it will be published on YouTube. If you have any questions during the call, you can ask these in the Q&A. You can also upvote questions if there's a question that you're particularly keen that we answer. We'll do our best to answer all the questions during the call. Any questions we can't answer or we don't get time to answer, we'll add to our frequently asked questions and we'll share a link with that after the recording with a link to the webinar on YouTube as well. We'll also use the Q&A to share any links that are referred to in the presentation. So today I'm delighted to welcome Katie Wilkes from Our Lady Magnificat and Jackie Newsom from the Matrix Academy Trust have joined the call today. They're going to tell us about how how they're using some of the reports that are available, and it's really going to bring the tools to life for you. We'll also cover the new features, the Monitor Your School Attendance Summary Report, the latest attendance statistics, and our upcoming regional conferences. I'll now hand over to my colleague Natalie Heath, who will talk you through our new features.
Hello everyone, my name's Natalie. I'm a content designer in our user-centered design team here at Attendance Data. And I'm going to talk you through some improvements we've made recently in the Monitor Your School Attendance tool for local authorities and trusts. So I'm just going to start with some updates we've made to the attendance data download. We've recently, you may have noticed, added some new data items to the weekly download that you get. There are 3 new columns. So the first is academic term, which is added as column 1. And this allows you to sort the data or see the data by term, and new terms will be added once new terms start. We've also added admission date and leaving date for each pupil as column 25 and 26. And this is to help give you a more accurate view of current pupils on roll and off roll at your schools. Next slide, please. And we've also released a new report in the View Your School Attendance Data Dashboard. So last year we released the absence banding reports for schools, and in response to feedback from local authorities and trusts, we've now also made this available to you. It's designed to help you understand the shape of your absence challenges and identify where to target your efforts to have the greatest impact. And it shows you absence data by 5% bands, which you may already be familiar with, for each of your schools. And it also gives you the functionality to explore absence patterns across different pupil groups. Next slide, please. So how it works, you may have already had a look. So all local authorities and trusts can now access the absence bandings report, and it's within a new page in the dashboard. So you'll see it listed when you log in on the left-hand side, which is shown next to the number 1 on this image. You then need to select one of your schools from the drop-down list, shown as number 2 in this image. And the report then puts pupils into, in that school that you've selected, into the relevant absence bands, ranging from 0.5% up to 50% absence, which represents pupils with the greatest absence within that school. The data within the report is updated daily to show you year-to-date absence figures. Also worth noting that on the right-hand side of the report, your bands are labelled to help you identify groups of pupils with and approaching persistent and severe absence rates. And you can also use, not shown on this page, but the filters are available here for you to drill down into the data and get a better understanding of how absence is distributed across each of the bands for different pupil characteristics such as year group, male or female, free school meals, and pupils receiving SEN support. Next slide, please. So when you're using the report, if you click into an absence band, you can view the pupils that make up that band. So this shows you their year group and overall absence rate. And again, you can use filters here to drill down further into the data and identify any groups of pupils who are perhaps under or overrepresented in each absence band. And the idea of this is that by looking at the data in this kind of banded way, we're really moving away from just looking at the headline persistent and severe absence figures and instead looking at the whole spectrum of absence. On to the next slide, please. So looking at the national banded data for last year as well, it's actually given us some kind of key insights of where to focus, which may be helpful to keep in mind when you're using your absence bandings report for your schools and looking at where to focus your efforts. So the three kind of main points here are a focus on increasing the number of pupils in that 0 to 5% absence band, which represents the pupils with the lowest absence rate. So most absence nationally is sitting at that lower level within the 5 to 15% absence range. So this is quite a large group. It makes up, it's made up of pupils of around 2.8 million. So it's potentially a large influential group to help improve them to attend. The second is a focus on year 7 to 8 transition. The national data shows us that the proportion of pupils who attend nearly every day in year 6 is 57%, but this drops down to 46% by the end of year 8. And the third area of focus is severe absence. So this is pupils within the 50% plus absence band. It's still increasing nationally, reaching 2% last year. And of course, this is a smaller set of pupils representing more complex challenges and circumstances, but also a key area of focus. So then the next slide, please. So to help you use the new report, we've published a user guide, and this includes guidance for analysing your own data to understand your absence distribution, identifying those absence trends across year groups and different cohorts, also using the tool over time to track when pupils are moving up or down absence bands, and using the tool to monitor the impact of strategies or interventions that you're putting in place. So this is available on Gov.uk and it sits alongside our other Monitor Your School Attendance user guides. So please go and have a look. I think now I'm handing over to Katie, who is going to share how their schools use the absence bandings report.
Thank you, Natalie. Hi, everybody. My name is Katie Wilkes and I am an executive principal within Our Lady of the Magnificat. We are a multi-academy trust based within the West Midlands, comprising of 19 schools from both the primary and secondary phases. Across our trust, next slide please, we have utilised the absence bandings report to move beyond the headline data and deepen our understanding of the spectrum of absence. We are no longer just focusing on the persistently absent pupils. Whilst this is a really crucial element of our work, we are now a lot more focused at working together to improve attendance across the whole spectrum. The absence reports have sharpened our evaluations so we can identify trends and action them more swiftly. We now use these evaluations to target our resources more strategically, improving attendance across the spectrum as a whole. Next slide, thank you. In my schools, we implement a tiered approach to make the most impact from the absence bandings reports. This is a systematic approach implemented through daily, weekly and monthly tiers. Whilst senior leaders analyse the reports, communication with and action from the wider team has been a pivotal part of our attendance improvements. It is everyone's responsibility to work together and improve attendance, not just the senior leaders. Every stakeholder has a role to play with actioning our findings as a result of our appropriate support and challenge. So an example of that is how we used findings from our absence bandings monitorings to write individualised scripts for our administration team to use, supporting them with challenging absence of identified pupils when taking phone calls from their parents in specific cases. It is also pivotal that pupils are kept informed of their attendance on a weekly basis, even at primary school level, so they can take ownership of their improvements. We do this one morning, once a week, as the pupils come into school during registration. That way, they are kept continually informed and can take increased ownership around their attendance percentages and improvements. Next slide, thank you. At the end of each month, we use the absence bandings reports to drill down further into that wider spectrum of attendance, which I mentioned earlier. We critically evaluate what we're doing to sustain the top attenders, which children are close to increasing a new band, and what's being done to motivate that change, what impact we're having so far, and what else needs to be done to sustain or secure improvements. The individual pupil dashboard, which you can see a screenshot of at the bottom right hand of my screen, is a really effective tool for informing conversations with parents and pupils. It helps them to visualise the percentages for absence and the impact that this is having on their progress and learning. In my schools, we use these illustrations when we are challenging specific trends that we've identified within our weekly monitoring and monthly monitoring for identified pupils. So, for example, when there's an increased absence on a specific day of the week, it's been a really powerful tool for helping parents and the pupils to visualise that trend and show them what needs to be done to improve it. Next slide, please. Finally, we also use the attendance over time feature to compare our current data set with historic data. It's a really important element of the continuous improvement cycle for attendance, identifying the impact so far and evaluating trends in performance over time. This has been particularly impactful for us at the end of each half term. I've placed a screenshot from one of my school's discussion evaluations at the end of autumn 2. We use this data to evaluate our impact and inform subsequent actions as we move forwards into spring 1. We're really delighted with the impact so far as a result of using these absence banding reports, and have used this comparison to celebrate successes amongst the whole school community. It really has been a team effort working together to improve attendance for all. And I'm now going to hand over to James.
Cool, thank you. I'm James Lawrence. I lead a cross-cutting data, and I'm going to talk to you about the Monitor Your School Attendance Summary Report for Trusts and Local Authorities, which is a new report that became available on Your Education based talking about school attendance area under your attendance. There's a new item, attendance summary download. Trust will have a report available as long as they have responsibility for at least 2 mainstream secondary schools. And local authorities will have up to 2 reports, one for academies and one for all other mainstream schools. If there's only one school in a category, then we recommend that school, as this report wouldn't contain. And these reports only cover mainstream secondary schools, but we are looking to expand them to schools. Oh, I'm quite laggy apparently. Apologies for that. Can you hear and see me okay?
Now I can. Thanks, James.
Okay, shall I do that slide again?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, Sorry about that. So the summary report will be distributed every half term, and I'll now run through what trusts and LAs will see in their reports. Previous slide. So in the Monitor Your School attendance area under Your Attendance Summary Reports, there's a new item, Attendance Summary Download, which is where trusts and local authorities can find their reports. Trusts will have a report available as long as they have responsibility for at least 2 mainstream secondary schools. Local authorities will have up to 2 reports, 1 for academies and 1 for all other mainstream schools. Reports are only available if there's at least 2 schools of that type. If there's only 1 school in a category, we recommend you look at the attendance summary for that school, as this report wouldn't contain anything that wasn't in there. And these reports only cover mainstream secondary schools for now, but we are looking to expand them to cover mainstream primary schools in future. Next slide, please. Okay, the summary report will be distributed every half term, and I'll now run through what trusts and LAs will see in their reports. All the figures in this part of the presentations are just examples based on the trust reports. They aren't the real national averages necessarily, or the performance of any real schools. The local authority version of the report is very, very similar. The main difference being slightly different guidance based on local authorities having slightly different options available to them in View Your Education data. And for brevity, from here on out, I'm just going to say trust, but everything applies to local authorities too, unless I say otherwise. So the report starts with a comparison of overall attendance and persistent absent rates with the national average for all the schools covered by the report. Next slide, please. After that, there's a chart showing the average overall attendance week by week for the most recent half term and comparing that with the national average. A trust could use this chart, for instance, to see whether attendance perhaps in the last week of the half term went down more or less than the national average and make individual week comparisons. This chart also shows the range of attendance across schools in the trust, and the report will also identify the school with the highest and lowest attendance in each week. Next slide, please. Next, the report contains the overall attendance and persistent absent rates for the 3 schools with the highest and the 3 lowest overall attendance. In this example report, there were only actually 5 schools in the trust, so you can only see 5 schools there. Your eyes aren't deceiving you, but for larger trusts, there would be up to 3 with the highest attendance and 3 with the lowest overall attendance, and the same for persistent absence. Groups, schools with attendance below the national average are coloured pink, and groups with attendance at or above the national average are coloured blue, and then the reverse for persistent absence. Next slide, please. After that, the report contains an indication of whether the schools highlighted in the previous section have increased or decreased overall attendance compared with the same period last year. So if overall attendance has increased, then the school's bar is coloured blue, otherwise it's coloured pink. This can help to identify for a school of interest whether it's improving or not. Next slide, please. Next, the report shows a table with 1 row per school, showing that school's attendance for all students and split by free school meals eligibility and SEND status. So here, SEND includes SEND support and EHCP, and not SEND means pupils not in either of those categories. We also show the national average for each of those groups as well. Next slide, please. Lastly, the report contains an absence banding table, which may be familiar to you if you've seen the absence bandings tool on View Your Education data. It shows the proportion of pupils in each year group in each 5% absence band up to 50%, and then the proportion of persistently and severely absent pupils in each year group. So that's the proportion over 10% and over 50% absent. There'll be 1 table for the trust as a whole, and then a separate table for each school in the trust. Some year groups might not be shown if a school either doesn't have that year group or there's a very small number of pupils in that year group. Next slide, please. So the Trust Summary Report is based on daily attendance data submitted by schools. Trusts are free to use it and share it as they like, and DfE encourages them to do so, especially with trustees and other stakeholders. The reports do have safeguards in place so that they won't reveal identifiable information. So you are free to share them more widely if you want to. We encourage you to use the reports to identify areas to explore in more detail, and they contain instructions for how to use other tools in View Your Education data to do that. The reports should help you to both identify specific schools to focus on and specific areas, both in those schools and in others in the trust, where there might be generally good attendance perhaps, but 1 or 2 specific areas worth focusing on. Now, specifically for local authorities, if the local authority is the responsible body, then you can use the report just as a trust would. And if you aren't, then you can use it in discussions with the responsible bodies as appropriate. And now we have a case study from Jackie Newsom, who is going to talk about how the Matrix Academy Trust are using these reports. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jackie Newsom, and I support and work closely with the CEO to improve attendance across the trust. Just for context, we're a trust of 7 schools that are quite geographically quite close to one another. And we already have in place very robust practices to manage attendance. We make good use of commercially produced packages and also in-house ones that we've developed. But as trust leaders, we're finding that the DFE summary report useful on a number of fronts. For a start, all the information is in one place. We found that it's easy to digest and will allow for those targeted questions that James referred to, not only for us as trust leaders, but also, more importantly, for our trustees who don't live and breathe education. On the slide there, you'll see just a quick reminder of the expectations on academy trust boards and governing bodies of maintained schools. That's within the working together to improve school attendance. And I'm going to cover on the next slide how we have used the report to try and address some of those issues. So next slide, please, folks. So we found that the summary report has helped us to clearly identify school level variation within the trust. Obviously, it's for the previous term, but it allows us to look back in order to anticipate things going forward at an earlier stage. We liked the headline trust attendance page. It's page 1 for us. We thought it was simple, visually. It was able to compare with national benchmarks, which was useful. But also that page that James refers to about our top 3 and our lowest 3 schools in the trust. Our CEO is going to be sharing that with the heads, teachers at the next meeting. And knowing our heads, and we've got a great group of head teachers, I'll introduce a little bit of competition between the 7 of them. In fact, one of our head teachers already had a sneak preview of the trust report. And this is a school that's new into the trust. And actually, he recognised that not only is he ranked above national for last term, but also in one of our top 3s. So that's validated what he's doing, and will also, he said he's going to use that in conversation with inspectors when they come. From a trust perspective, it's also helped us to identify that one of our Ofsted rated good schools might need a little bit more help in the area, because they ranked 6 out of 7, hovering around that 90%. And also their PA raised a question mark. So in that case, we're going to initiate a detailed attendance review for that particular school. The next 2 points about empowering our trustees and trust leaders and allowing for direct comparison with national benchmarks and with the equivalent period, I'll kind of cover together. So particularly liked and found useful the page where it compares with previous academic years. It's at a glance. So again, one of our schools, they were below national. However, when you compare them to the equivalent period last year, they're actually doing better. So it's still an improving picture from their perspective, and we can take that and discuss that with the trustees. But even though they are at the moment below national, the overall trust attendance information, we knew already, because of what we do in terms of the reviews, etc., which of our schools were likely to be affecting the overall attendance figure. But the week by week analysis kind of told us how much it's affecting. So one of our schools on a particular week last term, there was actually a difference of 10% between the highest and the lowest school. And also that comparison with the national, which was useful, very useful, to inform the conversations. Then the trust absence by year group, again, this sparks the question, it kind of helped us to identify which year group we might have to require a little bit more focus. So that will be taken to the attendance leads meeting that I've got next week, and very much looking at, okay, year 10 was flagged up in that 5 to 10% band, but not in all schools. In some schools, whereas in others it was year 9. So it really is an opportunity to ask those questions, but also to say, well, what share those good practices that you're doing. We've always banded, we've always looked at, maybe not as refined as this document and the tool currently does, but we've always looked at those youngsters that are in danger of slipping into like the persistent absence group. But this gives us a little bit more information. And similarly, attendance by pupil group. Again, it was good to see that our free school meals as a trust, 5 out of the 7 schools were doing better than the national free school meals youngsters, but whereas SEND needs a little bit more attention from us. So I think really to conclude, it's a tool. Yes, we have school systems and our school systems are good. They can be used to fine tune that analysis to suit our particular setting. We have a house system. It's led by the assistant heads of house who drive the attendance, but we're able to filter by registration, by attendance codes to see what exactly is affecting the attendance. But from the summary report has facilitated how I describe that funnel approach to looking at attendance, and ultimately it means that we're going to evaluate and be able to evaluate the effectiveness of school processes and our improvement efforts. So as a result of the preliminary conversation with the CEO, we're looking to plan a trust attendance conference, because we've recognised that we're going to need a little bit more time than the meetings that we have termly to look at the good practice. We're scheduling an attendance review earlier than planned for some of our schools, and to ensure that we can direct trust level support where it's needed. And as I mentioned before, to facilitate and the conversations with school attendance leads about how they can look at their own schools attendance management processes. Thank you.
Thanks. This is my slide now. If you just go back one, thank you. So I'm Tia, and I lead the production of the department's publication on pupil attendance. It uses the daily attendance data to show the national picture of attendance, which helps schools to measure their performance against national rates, or regions and local authorities of interest. If you go to the next slide, please. So the pupil attendance publication has 2 components. There's the Explore Education Statistics page, and there's also an interactive attendance dashboard. Users can view attendance data by daily, weekly, or year-to-date breakdowns, and look at individual school types, terms, and pupil characteristics. So the latest publication covers the week commencing the 16th of December 2024, which was the last week of the autumn term for schools. Therefore, the year-to-date statistics cover the full autumn term for this academic year. And you can see a summary of these statistics in the table on the left. You can see that overall absence was 6.5% for all schools, and there you can also see the breakdowns for different school types and attendance and absence rates. So I'll now turn your attention to the table on the right, which shows academic year comparisons. Over the last 3 autumn terms, overall absence has declined. It's gone from 7.8% in 2023 to 24 autumn term to 6.5% this autumn term, which shows that there have been improvements in attendance, absences reducing, so your efforts have been working. However, the rates are still a way off pre-pandemic levels, as you can see with the 4.7% overall absence rate from the 2018 to 19 autumn term. Now, to talk about the current school term that we're in. Previous analysis has shown that in each term, at least half of pupils who had 1 day of absence in the first week then went on to be persistently absent across the term. So this highlights how absence in the first week of term can be predicted of persistent absence across the term in whole. Therefore, now is a good time. It's a time where you'll want to use the attendance tools that have been shown today to understand which pupils were absent early on in this spring term and put in place early interventions to minimise their likelihood of becoming persistently absent. And finally, just to flag that persistent absence rates and terminally absence by pupil characteristics will be reintroduced to this national attendance publication on the 23rd of January, which is this Thursday. So when the publication page is updated, then you'll be able to view these different breakdowns. Thanks. I'm now passing over to Alex, I believe.
Thanks, Tia. Thank you and good afternoon. My name's Alex Turner and I work in the attendance policy team here at the DFE. Last week in the DFE Sector Bulletin, we mentioned an upcoming series of major regional conferences on the topic of school attendance. As Tia has just covered, thanks to the hard work of schools, trusts and local authorities up and down the country, progress has been made. Taking just that autumn term snapshot, we can see the progress that's been made, but there's still further to go to get back to pre-pandemic levels. And that speaks to this being a top priority, we know, for schools up and down the country, which is why we're running this series of in-person conferences later this term. These conferences are targeted at secondary school, initially targeted at secondary school and head teachers and senior leaders. And what they'll cover is actionable approaches used by schools who are really turning the dial on absence. They'll include new insight on the problem and what works, and they'll draw on the attendance toolkit we talked about in a previous webinar here. Content will include topics on smarter data analysis, like the 2 case studies we've seen today, getting culture right, effective systems and processes, as well as parental engagement and strong work with local authorities. There'll be a particular focus on transition into secondary and from year 7 to year 8, which Natalie covered earlier in today's webinar, because we know that's a key moment where attendance can go right or wrong. We strongly encourage secondary school head teachers or senior leaders to attend these conferences and help drive a shared community of practice within your region. You'll see on the next slide the current dates and locations for these conferences. They're subject to final confirmation imminently, but once we've got those, we'll be sending out invitations directly to head teachers starting from tomorrow. So please do look out for those and register as quickly as you can. And we look forward to seeing you in the conferences. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks to all the presenters today. Before we finish, we just want to leave you with some key messages to take away from today's session. Can we go to the next slide, please? So firstly, if you haven't already, please access the attendance toolkit for schools. There should be a link going into the chat. The toolkit supports schools to identify the drivers of absence and adopt effective practices to improve attendance. If you're a trust, a local authority or a mainstream secondary school, then please download your attendance summary report that we've talked about on the call. And the report will be coming out for primary school soon, and we'll notify you when it does. We'll send an email to any primary schools so you know when it's ready and available. Also, please have a look at your check leavers data report and make sure the leaving dates have been used correctly. And finally, just before we wrap up, a couple of things, events coming up. As Alex mentioned, we've got the regional conferences and invitations for those will be sent out tomorrow. And our next webinar will be held on the 25th of March, and there should be a link going in the chat so you can register for that. We really hope you've enjoyed this webinar. We've also posted a link in the chat to a very short survey, and we'd love to hear your ideas on what we should cover at future sessions. So if you could complete that, we'd be really grateful for your feedback. Wrapping up a little bit early, so always good to have 10 minutes back. Hope you have a lovely afternoon and thank you so much for joining.